Hello there and welcome. I'm Rev Nhien, founder of Evolving Enneagram. If you've been seeking a compassion-based, contemplative approach to Enneagram-informed transformation, you are in the right place. This is where contemplation meets the Enneagram. We are in week 10 of a 12-week Sunday talk series based on the theme, The Care of the Soul. And throughout these weeks, I'm drawing insights and inspiration from my new book, The Enneagram of the Soul, a 40-day spiritual companion for the 9 types. This week's talk is titled, Seeking Guidance from the Father Within. It is Father's Day today, Sunday, June 15th, here in the United States. And so today's talk is definitely inspired by that fact. And so I'll take today's talk in 3 parts. I'd like to begin with just a few reflections on Father's Day, what it brings up for some of us, talking about fatherhood and the father archetype, as well as the divine father or the spiritual notion of father. And then in part 2, I'd like to share about practice 8 from the book. This is the practice of journaling. And when you hear this, I bet some of you are like, yes, I love journaling, and others are like, I hate journaling. I just want you to stay open. So journaling, and stay open to like maybe this form of journaling. We're going to focus on how it might be a spiritual practice. So in part 3, I would like to offer a few questions related to your Enneagram type. And so this could be something you apply to the journaling practice, like questions you can bring to the journaling practice that I offer or recommend for this week. So let's begin. So let's talk about Father's Day. Just to start off, I want to wish you a blessed Father's Day if you are listening to this on this day. And I want to honor that I happen to know a bunch of great human beings who are what I consider amazing fathers, and you are in our Evolving Enneagram community, and I get to hear you share your love for your children and how devoted and attentive, dedicated you are to offering yourself up. So I want to honor that and say that we know, right, that this is not always the case. And so just honoring your commitment, understanding that commitment and dedication and devotion is different from perfection, if there's even such a thing. So I just want to name this and honor it and give life to where it's already working. And I also want to say that Father's Day is tricky business. For some, indeed, it is a time of like deep celebration, and so we recognize the humanness and of our fathers and the gift they give in their dedication, or not just fathers, but father figures. I'm just going to fold it all into one. So let's take a moment, to really honor your fathers and father figures, the human fathers. And again, sometimes it's not your biological father, right? Maybe it was a teacher or an uncle or a neighbor who really offered or offers you this. So we take a moment first to celebrate that. Yeah. And then I want to also name that perhaps just as common, or perhaps more common, is that Father's Day brings up grief or loss, whether it's loss of our actual fathers or father figures who have made their transition, or it's the grief for the fathers we never knew. And I know for me, I had a deep process around both of my parents, actually, of like grieving what I wished they were to me, what I wished they offered to me. And it was only after that could I begin to really appreciate what they did offer, who they are. I had to go through a process of really going, oh, yeah, I keep wanting my dad to be this and he's not this. this way, or he can't love me in this way. And it was actually honoring that grief that enabled me to move forward in accepting and then now even appreciating the ways that my father has shown up for me and truly done his best for me and continues, and I am blessed. I know that my father is still alive. So I want to acknowledge this, that today could be a day of great grief, and it could be valuable for you to have some ritual or process for yourself to remember your father or father figure. And then also, even though I talked earlier about those of you who are fathers, I do hope you take a moment not to be gentle on yourself if you feel like you have fallen short as a father. I volunteer in prison a lot, so you can imagine when you talk about absentee fathers that many of these guys really do like actively process their intention and their efforts toward being there for their kids. And so many of them are just, it's so touching. They're so motivated to grow and do better and be better for their children. It's really, really quite beautiful. But at the same time, they're needing to process the fact that there's someone else out there, possibly that, their ex or whoever is dating, or with, who is now serving as the father figure while they are incarcerated. So intense stuff, right? So I just want to take a moment. You might even pause the video. I really do invite you to do that, to say a prayer for humanity in this space of fatherhood and the blessings of that in our humanness, and also the grief of the lack or the loss of that in our human experience. And please know then, that I hope if you celebrate, you're not celebrating alone. And if you are grieving, I hope that you feel that you are not grieving alone. And so, as we turn to this larger sense, moving beyond even individual human incarnations of fatherhood, I want to talk about father as an archetype. And again, this is just, it's archetype, it's symbol. So in a way, archetype is not that different from stereotype. Like it's a framework, it's a form. And and so not everything falls into it, right? But I want to say in general that the father archetype, at least in Jungian psychology, represents like authority, structure, order. It can embody qualities like protection, provision, guidance. And Jung believed that the father archetype was present in all individuals, right? So whether or not you're male or female, whatever your gender identification, that this archetype lives in all of us. Right? And this archetype is also like fundamental to our collective consciousness. So it's almost like, oh, yes, like we always say, the healing of this aspect within ourselves impacts the healing of this energy in the larger world. So you think about the importance, the healing of our relationship to authority and structure, our relationship to protection, provision, and guidance, and all of that sort of impacting the whole, and how that is held within the greater body that is our collective being, right? So the father archetype, it can play a key role in our individual development, and it can provide a model for behavior that influences how we perceive authority, right? Like I remember how much of my life was rebelling against my dad, and then I was found out in college. I was like, yeah, you're doing things that aren't in your interests just to be against your dad. I would definitely had to go through that phase of understanding my relationship to this thing, and it's like, oh, well, I have the power to really choose what is best for me now, but I had to grapple with my relationship to authority and to that like I love that the idea is guidance, because that's what I really equate with like fatherhood, this archetype of the teacher, the guide, the mentor. And how you could even extrapolate, or you can think about how when that's stunted, when that's not healthy, when it's malformed in some way, either we're against that wisdom or authority and we go against it in a way that's unhealthy, or we overly concede to this um, authority. And this is where I'll move into, we can do it by sort of projecting it onto God, if you will, God the Father, and have these issues around, oh, I'm not obeying God. Even if God is like the deepest wisdom within me, this idea of obeying, is like, oh, like there's a resistance there if we haven't done like some healing on what that might mean, if we believe that something is the highest and the best, the wisest. Like, wouldn't we want to obey, surrender ourselves to that wisdom and that guidance, right? So it's just another way of looking at like surrendering our will to a wisdom bigger than our own, but that which is within ourselves. And I know some of you are like, I don't think it's outside of me. So just owning that, like your higher wisdom, right? That there's a knowing inside of you that you can rely on. There's a deep knowing, that knowing beyond your everyday, oh, I'm going to figure this out intellectually, that kind of knowing. So understanding that sometimes, like, it looks like we're just relating to the idea of fatherhood, or we're relating to specific attributes of our father figures, and consider that your healing in those regards affects, this is just what I offer, this idea that it affects how we relate to this notion of even like the collective father or the divine father, and how we repair that in our society by doing it individually. So, one way, just this is just one way that you might practice connecting with uh, this father archetype, if you will. I hesitate to only call it an archetype because for me, that's a little bit like it's only in form, but there's a very real sense of what this divine like father is. But I just want to keep it a little bit open, because I believe that you, in your divine wisdom, will be automatically drawn to what is needed for you, meaning this. I just did the practice that I'm about to share with you. I did it with my partner, Colby. He and I did it side by side together. And afterward, I thought to ask, oh, did you bring in a notion of like the divine father or your own father who has passed away? And he's like a mix of both. And before I asked, I actually had that thought, like, I bet you he brought in a mix of both, especially since his father has passed. And so that was really quite touching. And I want to just hold this notion open of what feels right for you as I invite you into this practice now, as we move now into part two. And I hope some of this more conceptual stuff will make a little bit more sense and have a little bit more meat in its practical application here. Practice 8 in the Enneagram of the Soul is called journaling, the still small voice. And again, you might have a very, you might hate journaling, might like have never really journaled, or you might be like, journaling is my jam, Yin, and it just I want to honor this diversity. But I really would love to see if just for this week you could consider taking on this journaling practice, either replacing one that you currently engage in or adding to it, because I think it could be really, really rich, and it can relate to whatever you're experiencing, whether it's celebration or grief, or a little bit of both regarding fathers. So I open my book with a few quotes, a couple quotes. One from Jennifer Williamson, who wrote, "Journal writing, when it becomes a ritual for transformation, is not only life changing, but life expanding." And then Alexandra Johnson wrote, Successful journals break the deadlock of introspective obsession. What that means to me, why I felt like it was important to include that, just to be clear, is a lot of times I think in our self-help or spirituality worlds, I really don't think this is self-help. It's transformation using the divine, but it can get equated as such, right? We become self-obsessed where, oh, let me process this. I'm writing it down. And so sometimes we actually spiral in on ourselves where it's like we're not, like we kind of get trapped in our own like belly button gazing, if you will. And I actually believe that journaling, if it's done a certain way, can, yes, take us more deeply into there, but done a different way can actually draw us out of that introspective obsession, which often actually leaves us feeling, I mean, I'm not calling this introspection bad. It can result in us chronically feeling not good enough, right? Like we need to improve something, obsessive self-help, if you will. So, as I write in my book, journaling as a spiritual practice involves contemplating life from our spiritual center. We approach writing not so much from the stance of telling, but of listening. Natalie Goldberg, who is known for bringing writing into a form of Zen meditation practice, says this: writing is 90% listening. You listen so deeply to the space around you that it fills you, and when you write, it pours out of you. Listen to the past, future, and present right where you are. Listen with your whole body, not only with your ears, but with your hands, your face, the back of your neck. Listening is receptivity. As I write, set aside 10 to 15 minutes each day to journal from this place of sacred listening. Setting a timer, write without stopping your pen or censoring your thoughts. You can simply write free form. However, if you prefer to use prompts, know that I'm going to be offering prompts related to this Father's Day theme, right? The theme of the Father within. And in the Christian tradition, or at least the Christian contemplative tradition, we connect that not to like some man, right? But to, it's almost like it is the authority figure within, like that higher knowing, this guide, if you will, or you can call it your inner wisdom. So we're not writing merely from the place of, oh, Nyen's thoughts for the day. I remember when I had a journal when I was young. I loved journals and I loved writing things like my favorite color is green. Like it was really about like me in my like individual personhood and expression. And so that's not what I'm talking about today. Nothing wrong with that, but inviting you to a listening that taps into like a larger wisdom within yourself. So I'm going to invite you to journal this week, and you don't even have to use my prompts if you don't want to. But whether or not you use the prompts, I want you to write as if no one else will ever read your writing. This is so important. So you do not censor it and try to make it coherent or pretty or wise. And so you can later choose to share your writing with others if you are in our CPE groups, our contemplative practices, and the Enneagram groups. Of course, we would welcome you sharing your writing with us. But it's super important that you write as if others will not see it so that your inner world, that inner knowing, feels completely safe to fully show up honestly. And write, even if you think you're just rambling or repeating yourself or uttering nonsense, just go right during that time. And regarding the 10 to 15 minutes, I have to say that Colby and I first We did it for 5 minutes and we're like, that was fast. Because we're like, oh, should we really do 10? So we did, and so we added on. And even at 10, I was like, I could keep going. And it's like, oh, there's some surprise things that were emerging from the journaling. And also recognize that part of why I'd like for you to do this at least for the week, see if you can commit to it, is that sometimes if you haven't done it in a long time, the first stuff is like a dump. Like it's almost like you got to get the stuff at the top of your head out first before it can even begin to feel at all like fruitful. So, and sometimes our hearts need to just emote onto the page so we can discover like the deeper feelings that might underlie, our surface reactions. So back to my book. So instead of trying to shut off our minds, we can deliberately trace our mental thought trail on paper and see where it leads. At the end of our journaling journey, we might find a place of perfect silence and stillness. We can even hear the still small voice of spirit. As Goldberg says, we are taught in Zen meditation to continually cut through our wandering, obsessive thoughts and come back to the breath. I understood the importance of this, how we learn to let go, but I also noticed I had a fascination with those thoughts. What if I actually followed my thoughts, went out into the tangle, saw where they led, used writing as another way to eventually let go? Indeed, a part of why I'm inviting this practice is that even though in evolving Enneagram, our main practice that we recommend is this practice of silence, like returning, letting go of the thinking. This is why, like, having diverse spiritual practices can be helpful. Sometimes what we need to do is actually follow the trail of that thought, as Goldberg so beautifully writes, right? As she writes, what if I actually followed my thoughts, went out into the tangle, saw where they led, and then used writing as another way to eventually let go? And then back to my words, journaling can empty us in a way that renders us more hospitable to the light of truth. And for today's purpose, I want to say it's more hospitable to the Father within, to the wisdom within. Your journaling exercise, if you choose to take this on, is to, nope, wrong journal. I have multiple journals here. Is to first, this is a journal I worked on today. First is to write the question down before you set the timer. And the question is basically asking, Dear Father within. And then write down your question first. So I wrote down my question. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Maybe in CPE. But so write down your question. This, maybe you want to do this after your centering prayer sit. Write down your question and then set the timer for 10 to 15 minutes. And then write dear and then your name. Like, dear, not going to show it to you. Dear Nhien. I'll tell you the first part. I'm glad you asked. That's how I answered myself. Speaking for the Father within, I've got to tell you, I used to journal all the time and I haven't in a while. And I was like, wow, like it's crazy how your brain thinks you figured out a topic and you've thought about it. But when you start journaling, like new insights, like these deeper insights came out. So I'm actually really excited to continue this practice this week. I'm like, oh my God, these answers were here. I knew these things, and I just needed to journal to get them out into like this visible form where I could really see and hear them. And I hope that is true for you as well. So you ask the question to the Father within, you write down that question, Dear Father within, and then you ask the question. And you could stay on the same question all week if you want. You can have a new question every day. I'm just going to leave all that up to you. But when you write it, write Dear Nhien, like you're talking from outside of your present consciousness, just as an experiment, right? Again, not forcing anyone to do anything, but we both, Colby and I both found it very fruitful. Activation day 3. Good question. I open with a quote by Tony Robbins. The quality of your life is a direct reflection of the quality of the questions you are asking yourself. The reason I want to tie this in with today's talk on fatherhood, this notion of questions, is because of this archetype of instruction, right? Like offering guidance and instruction for life, right? And I think that healthy instruction honors your wisdom, isn't someone telling you how it is, you know? And so this piece, whether your wisdom, we're talking about the Father in you, right? Rather than me giving you the answers, this week I'm giving you the questions. And these can be the questions that you actually type in your journaling practice. Here, I keep lifting this. I have like, ah, these aren't even all my journals, but they're all like trees. So what you can do is pause for your question and write it down, or it's in the book too, and make that your journaling prompt for the day. And then, but remember, the difference is you're going to be asking the Father within, dear Father within, and then you ask this question. So let's move into the 9 Enneagram questions. Type 1. Dear Father within, what is the real reason I am upset? Type 2. What have I bartered for love? Type 3. How do I hide behind my successes? Type 4. Who am I beyond what I feel in this moment? Type 5. How does uncertainty enhance my life? Type 6. How have leaps of faith brought me unimagined good? Type 7. How often do I miss out on the joy of the present moment? Type 8. How does my resistance to vulnerability keep me small? Type 9. How much energy do I expend in order to stay unaffected? So some of you who have been journeying with me for a time now have heard these questions before and have maybe even answered them before. So I invite you to take this different approach and bring it into the journaling space. And I'll close with a quote from Gabor Mate. Compassionate curiosity about the self does not mean liking everything we find out about ourselves, only that we look at ourselves with the same non-judgmental acceptance we would wish to accord anyone else who suffered and who needed help. I want to simply reiterate that reminder regarding compassion, how important it is as we consider Father's Day, as we consider our relationship with human fathers, as we consider our relationship, especially depending on our religious or spiritual background, the notion of the spiritual or divine father. And then as we possibly open up more fully to realizing the Father and I are one, knowing that there is within me this authority and protection and guidance that is fully available. I just need to open and to ask. Namaste.